Her hips moved like water finding its way downhill, slow and certain and impossible to look away from. The ancient harp wept its low, aching melody through the smoky tavern air, and every man in the room had forgotten how to breathe. She was draped in red and gold, ringlets catching the firelight like scattered coins, her silk veil hiding her face but hiding nothing of the power she carried in every turn of her waist, every sweep of her arms, every deliberate, devastating step across that small wooden stage. And in the darkest corner of the room, hidden beneath a traveling hood, the Alpha King Leon of Elmora sat with his hands pressed flat against the table, his ocean blue eyes burning at the edges with a faint, involuntary red. He had never seen anything like her in his life. What he did not know, what no one in that tavern knew, what no one in all of Elmora could have imagined even in their wildest dreaming, was that the woman who had just brought the king of Elmora to the edge of losing control was the same girl he had spent 19 years looking straight past. She was Dana, daughter of Beta Soren, the shy girl with the stutter and no wolf. And tonight, she was about to change everything. Now, let's get into the story if you're wondering how Dana came to be on that stage. The long stone corridor in the east wing of Elmora's palace where the oil lamps burned amber against ancient walls, and where, on an otherwise ordinary afternoon, everything went wrong in the particular way that only truly important things do. Dana had her nose in a book. She always had her nose in a book. It was the one place the world could not reach her, those pressed pages, that dense ink, the smell of old parchment that the royal library gave off like a perfume. She was small and quiet in the way she always was when she moved through the palace, trying to take up as little space as possible, her footsteps careful, her shoulders slightly curved inward as though she were trying to apologize for her own presence. She rounded the corner near the east wing and walked directly into a wall of silk and expensive perfume. The impact was sharp and total. Her book flew from her arms and hit the stone floor with a sound that seemed far too loud for the moment, splaying itself open, pages fanning wide. For one suspended, dreadful heartbeat, nobody moved. Then one of the ladies in waiting, a sharp-eyed girl named Celia, bent down and picked it up. She looked at it. And she laughed. It was not a gentle sound. Kara, the future queen of Elmora, took the book from Celia's outstretched hand. She was magnificent in the way that weapons are magnificent, all controlled power and precise beauty. Her dark hair swept back from a jaw carved for beauty. She had gotten her wolf at 12 years old. The entire kingdom had celebrated for an entire day. She was tall and fierce and had never once in her life been invisible to anyone, and she looked down at the open pages of Dana's book with an expression that started as contempt and sharpened into something gleaming. Because on every visible page, pressed hard into the parchment with the urgent fervor of someone who could not stop even when they tried, was a single name. Leon. 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 King Leon. Written in circles. Written in vine scrolls. Written with small stars and crescent moons drawn around the letters. Leon. Over and over and over like a prayer the writer could not stop saying. Kara looked up from the pages and met Dana's eyes. "Well," she said, in the sweet, deadly voice of a woman who has just been handed a gift she did not expect. "What do we have here?" Dana's face went the color of hot coals. Her mouth opened. What came out was not words. It was the beginning of them, broken off at the root, scattered before they could form. That is not. It is not what. She writes his name, said Petra, Kara's second lady in waiting, leaning over Kara's shoulder with wide, delighted eyes. Over and over like a lovesick little child. Kara tilted her head slowly, studying Dana the way a cat studies something it has cornered and is not yet finished playing with. "How long," she said, her voice dropping low and musical with cruelty, "would you keep pining for my betrothed, little mouse? How long have you been sitting in your corner filling pages with a name that was never, and will never, be yours?" Dana's throat was a locked door. She tried to push words through it and nothing came. "She cannot even answer," Celia said lightly. "Shall we feel sorry for her?" "No," Kara said. She stepped closer. One slow, deliberate step. "Let me tell you something, Beta's daughter. There is a word for girls who build shrines to men who do not know they exist. And that word is not romantic. That word is miserable. You have no wolf. You cannot complete a sentence. You trail through this palace like a ghost who does not know it is dead, and you have the audacity to fill a book with his name as though the moon goddess herself would reach down and arrange it for you." She leaned slightly forward. "She will not. He will never look at you. And somewhere deep in that quiet little heart of yours, you already know that." She reached out and flicked the side of Dana's face. Light. Dismissive. The way you brush away something that does not quite qualify as an inconvenience. Dana's eyes were burning. She would not cry. She could not cry here. She pressed her lips together and stared at the floor and felt every word land in the exact place it had been aimed. Then the corridor changed. It was a quality of stillness first, then the sound of footsteps, unhurried and certain, the footsteps of someone who has never once needed to announce themselves because every room they enter already knows they are there. "Give her the book." The voice was quiet. It did not need to be anything else. Kara went rigid. Celia and Petra straightened so fast their breath audibly caught. And Dana, who had been staring at the floor willing herself to dissolve into the stone, looked up. King Leon of Velmora stood at the end of the corridor. He had come alone, no procession, no guards, simply moving through his own palace with the unhurried authority of a man who owns every corridor he walks through. He was broad across the shoulders, dark-haired, and his ocean blue eyes were fixed on the scene before him with an expression that was not anger but something quieter and more final than anger. He crossed the corridor in a few long strides and held out his hand. Kara placed the book in it without a word. He did not look at the pages. Did not make a single thing of what was written there. He walked directly to Dana and held it out to her. She took it. Her hands were shaking. All three women curtsied. Dana folded herself downward, book pressed to her chest, eyes fixed on the floor, burning all the way down to her bones. Kara rose from her curtsy and looked at the king with the practiced warmth of a woman who has spent years learning to perform devotion on command. "My lord," she began, voice honeyed and smooth, "you ought to know what was in that book. The beater's daughter has quite the, shall we say, affection for you." "I heard." He uttered those two words with no warmth, no hostility, simply the closing of a door. He looked at Kara. "Go and rest. 3 of you." Kara's ladies-in-waiting curtsied again and retreated down the corridor with barely concealed relief. Kara lingered a half-breath longer, as though she wished to press the matter, caught Leon's gaze, and thought better of it. She curtsied once more, turned, and was gone. Then the corridor became quiet. Leon turned to Dana. She was still looking at the floor. She had the book clutched against her chest like it was the last possession she had. She was praying, in the way that people pray when they have run out of all other options, that the floor would simply open and take her down. "Look at me," he said. She looked up. His eyes were steady on hers, ocean blue and unreadable, and there was nothing in them that she could identify as cruelty, which was almost worse, because what she could identify was something close to puzzlement. "Why do you let them treat you that way?" he asked. A genuine question. The question of a man who has observed something he genuinely cannot make sense of. Dana opened her mouth. And the stutter came like a tide, crashing through every word before it could stand on its own feet. They do not. I mean, it is not as though I." He waited. He did not fill the silence with impatience or pity. He simply waited, which was somehow worse than either. "Learn to defend yourself," he said, when it became clear that the sentence was not going to arrive. He said it without condescension, the way he might state any plain truth. And then, because he was the kind of man who said what needed saying and moved on, he nodded once and walked away. His footsteps faded down the corridor. Dana stood alone in the amber light with a book full of his name pressed to her chest and the feeling of being both entirely seen and entirely overlooked at the exact same moment. She stayed like that for a long moment. Then she slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold stone floor, which was not dignified and she did not care, and she pressed her forehead to her knees and breathed. He had looked at her. He had spoken to her. He had handed back her book as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. And then he had told her to defend herself and left, which was very easy for a king to say and very impossible for a girl like her to do. She sat with that truth for exactly as long as she needed to. Then she stood up, smoothed her dress, tucked the book under her arm, and walked in the opposite direction. Because tonight, while the palace would be asleep, Dana had somewhere to be. Dancing had found her the way the truest things find people, not through a choice but through a recognition. She had been 14 the first time she slipped into the old storage room at the far edge of the palace grounds on a warm festival evening and let the music coming over the walls move through her, and her body had simply known what to do with it. She moved, and she was not the girl who stuttered, not the girl without a wolf, not the girl that ladies-in-waiting used for sport in empty corridors. She was something fluid and powerful and entirely, dangerously free. She had kept it secret the way she kept all her real things secret, wrapped close and unexposed, because the world had taught her early that the things she loved could be turned into weapons against her if the wrong eyes found them. The tavern had come when she was 16 and carrying more courage than she knew to be capable of. It sat at the edge of the forest road, low-lit and warm and loud, the kind of place the palace pretended did not exist and therefore everyone in the palace knew about intimately. Men came from the surrounding villages and the palace grounds alike, drawn by the drink and the dancing and the freedom of a place where the formalities of rank sat down and rested for a few hours. The tavern owner was a heavy-set man named Brent, with the canny eyes of someone who had spent decades assessing what would and would not make him money. When Dana first appeared at his back entrance in her red dancer's costume, the small top stopping above her navel and the long skirt swirling around her legs, the gold ringlets catching even the dim light of the alley, he had looked at her for a long, measuring moment. She had danced for him as an audition. When she finished, Bren had been quiet for a time. Then he had said, slowly, "In 30 years of running this tavern I have never seen anything like that in my life." Her terms were two and non-negotiable. She would take no payment. And her identity would remain unknown to every living soul, no matter what was asked, no matter who asked it. Bren had agreed without hesitation. He was a practical man. He knew what she was worth. She always danced with a silk veil across her face. The silk was fine enough that the firelight came through it and the audience could see the suggestion of the features beneath, which was, in its own way, more intoxicating than a full face revealed. Mystery has always been more powerful than clarity. And to seal the mystery completely, Dana had gone to the royal library. As the beater's daughter, she had access to shelves that not just anyone was permitted to touch. The highest ones, where the truly ancient scrolls sat in their cedar cases and had not been opened in generations because most people considered them impenetrable. Dana had not considered them impenetrable. She had considered them the most interesting things she had ever encountered, and she had spent years painstakingly deciphering their faded, archaic script, cross-referencing symbols across multiple texts until they began to yield their meanings. It was in one brittle, water-stained scroll, older than the palace itself, that she had found the formula for what she came to call the magic dust. Ground from moon herbs and pale crushed crystal using a method so particular that even Dana had taken 3 failed attempts before she got it right, the powder was silver gold and caught the light like a second skin. When applied to the hair and skin, it erased scent entirely. Not masked it, not reduced it, but erased it, as completely as though the person wearing it had no biological existence at all. In a kingdom of werewolves, where identity was woven into scent as intimately as into face or voice, this was not a small thing. This was the kind of thing that made the impossible merely difficult. She applied it before every performance and after, and then changed back into her ordinary clothes in the small cave just inside the forest near the palace wall, and walked back through the palace gates as though she had been nowhere at all. No one had ever come close to finding her out. She was the tavern's best dancer. Better than all the others who performed there combined, and this was not vanity, it was simply observable fact. Men fell quiet when she took the stage. Women who came with their men found themselves gripping their companions' arms just a little tighter. Bren's profits on the nights she danced were double what they were on the nights she did not. She became something of a legend along the forest road, the red dancer with the gold ringlets and the silk veil, the one nobody knew, the one nobody could find between performances, the one who appeared like a breeze and vanished like it too. And every single night she walked back to the palace through the dark and sat at the breakfast table the next morning, quiet and unremarkable, and no one looked twice at her. She loved it. She loved every part of it with a fierceness that scared her sometimes, how much she needed it, how much it gave back to her everything the rest of the world withheld. On that stage she was not invisible. She was not the girl with no wolf and no voice. She was the only thing in the room that anyone could see. She was wanted. She was admired. Men pressed forward to catch a closer look. And none of them knew they were looking at the beater's daughter. This was her secret. This was the only place in all of Velmora where Dana was entirely, magnificently herself. And then, on one ordinary night that would prove to be anything but ordinary, the Alpha King walked through the door. Leon had not meant to find the tavern. He had meant to walk. He had been walking since midday, ever since the last council meeting had pressed all the air out of the room with its demands and its disputes and its endless, necessary, exhausting weight. He was an alpha, which meant the welfare of his pack lived inside his chest like a second heartbeat, constant and demanding. And there were days when the responsibility of it was simply too large for any one body to hold quietly. He had put on a traveling hood, told his warriors he was not to be followed, and walked into the forest until the palace was behind him and the trees were breathing around him and the only sound was his own footsteps on the old earth. He had not meant to end up at the tavern. He had simply followed the sound of cheering. He stood outside it for a moment, listening to the energy coming from within, that particular warm chaos of people gathered together for the simple pleasure of being alive. Then he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was crowded and loud and warm with firelight and body heat. And for a moment he simply stood inside the door and let the anonymity of it wash over him. No one knew who he was. No one rose, no one bowed, no one needed anything from him. He pulled the hood a little lower, found a small corner table, and Saturday. He looked toward the stage. And everything stopped. She was already dancing. The red costume moved with her like it was part of her body, the gold ringlets catching the firelight in quick bright flashes as she turned, her waist swirling to the deep, aching pull of the ancient harp in a way that seemed less like movement and more like language, like her body was saying something that words could not hold. The silk veil caught the light as she moved, and beneath it the dark suggestion of her eyes, the curve of her mouth, the tilt of her chin as she looked out over the crowd with the unhurried confidence of a woman who knows exactly what she is doing and exactly what it is doing to everyone watching. Leon had seen many things in his years as king. He had stood at the head of his pack of armies. He had sat in judgment over men twice his age. He had faced wolves that outweighed him and not flinched. He had never, not once in his life, felt something arrive in his chest the way this arrived, sudden and total and without his permission. Like something that had always been there but had been waiting, patiently, for the right moment to make itself known. He leaned forward slightly without meaning to. His eyes, beneath the hood, began to rim a faint, involuntary red. Dana had been dancing for nearly 20 minutes when she felt the change in the room. She had felt it before in other ways, the shift in energy when she was dancing well, the way the crowd moved from restless to transfixed. But this was different. This was directional. She found herself scanning the room without quite knowing why, moving her gaze from face to face until she reached the corner table, the hooded figure sitting very still in the dark. And she saw the eyes. Ocean blue. She would have known them anywhere. She had been studying those eyes from doorways and corridors and the edges of crowded rooms for the better part of 10 years. She knew the particular quality of their color, the way they caught light, the way they went very still when he was thinking hard. She knew them the way you know the things you have loved so long they have become a part of you. It was him. The realization hit her like a step she had not seen coming, and she missed exactly one beat of the harp's rhythm, her foot coming down a fraction too late, and the stumble was small but on a stage it was everything. She pitched forward. Several men near the front gasped and rose from their seats. She did not let them reach her. She gathered herself and ran, off the stage and through the back entrance and into the night, and she ran the way a person runs when they are being chased by their own heart. Her thoughts were a storm as she pushed through the dark trees. Had he seen her? Had something in her movement given her away? Some particular turn of the wrist or set of the shoulders that he would recognize from the palace? No. He could not have. She was covered, veiled, masked in the magic dust that left no scent, no trail, nothing. She was a ghost. She was nobody. She was just the Red Dancer. And the Red Dancer was nobody he had ever seen. But his eyes had been red. She pressed her back against a tree in the dark and tried to breathe. The Alpha King Leon, her long-time, lifelong, entirely too enormous crush, had been sitting in that tavern watching her dance with his wolf eyes burning at the edges. She had done that. She, Dana, the beater's daughter with a stutter and no wolf, had made the most powerful man in the kingdom almost lose control. She did not know what to do with that. So she ran to the cave, changed her clothes with hands that were not quite steady, applied the magic dust one more time to be safe, and walked back into the palace as the night deepened around the walls. Back at the tavern, the room had settled. The other dancers had taken the stage. The crowd had moved on, as crowds do. But Leon had not moved. He sat in his corner with his hood still up and his hands flat on the table, and his mind was running a single question over and over like a wheel that could not stop turning. Who was she? He pushed back from the table and went to the door and stood in the night air and tried to pick up a trace of her with the senses his wolf had given him. Nothing. No scent. No direction. She had simply ceased to exist the moment she left the stage, as though she had been made of firelight and had dissolved back into it. He went to Bren. He asked, quietly, with the particular calm that men in authority use when they are asking something they are not yet willing to call desperate. Bren spread his hands and offered his most sincere expression of helplessness. He knew nothing about her. He had never known. That was the arrangement. Leon stood in the doorway of the empty back room and looked at the space where she had been. Who was she? Word went out the next day. Quietly at first, just a few of his most trusted men, asking careful questions along the forest road and at the market stalls and of the village elders who knew every face in a 10-mile radius. They came back with nothing. They went to Bren and Bren gave them the same spread of sincere hands. They asked the other dancers, who knew only that she appeared and disappeared like weather and had always been that way. Her actions were very telling. She did not want to be found. She had taken careful, deliberate, sophisticated measures to ensure she could not be found. This was not a woman who had stumbled accidentally into anonymity. This was a woman who had built it, stone by stone, like an architect. Leon found himself thinking about that, the level of intelligence and planning required to be undetectable in a kingdom of wolves. He found himself thinking about her at moments that had nothing to do with dancing. Council meetings. Training sessions. The long solitary walks he took to clear his head. She was simply there, in the back of his mind, like a song you cannot unhear. What was supposed to be a discreet search had not stayed discreet. By the end of the week, the palace knew. The market knew. The surrounding villages knew. The Alpha King was looking for a woman, a dancer from Bren's tavern, and could not find her. This was a thing that had simply never happened before. Leon was not a man who wanted things he could not have. He was not a man who chased. He was the kind of man that things came to, and the kingdom had never seen him otherwise. The women of the palace watched the development with a range of emotions. Several of them harbored quiet hope. Most of them harbored irritation on Kara's behalf. And Kara herself, daughter of Lord Kyle and future Queen of Elmora, harbored something that she was too proud to call fear but that kept her awake past midnight in her fine chambers. Kara's story began before Leon's did, or before Leon had any say in it. Her father, Lord Kyle, was one of the oldest and most powerful elders in the king's court, a wolf warrior of the old school who had served the great Alpha King Vidor, Leon's father, for decades. And in the last great pack battle of Vidor's reign, when the enemy had broken through the line and the king himself had been surrounded and outnumbered and very nearly lost, it had been Kyle who had fought his way through single-handed and pulled him out alive. Vidor had been many things, but he was not a man who let debts go unpaid. He had brought Kyle's lineage into the royal family itself, promising his son Leon to Kyle's daughter Kara before either of them was old enough to understand what that meant. A blood debt paid in the currency of futures. Kara had grown up knowing she was going to be queen. She had been trained for it, groomed for it, shaped by it from the time she could walk. She was a formidable wolf, strong and fast, and she had gotten her wolf earlier than almost anyone in the kingdom's recent history. She was, by every measurable standard, exactly what a queen should be. What she was not was loved by the man she was meant to marry. Leon treated her with absolute respect. He was unfailingly courteous, always dignified in her presence, never cruel or dismissive. But there was something in him that remained at a careful distance from her, something she could never quite close the gap to, no matter how perfectly she performed her role. She had learned to work around it, using the authority of her position, the fear that came with being the future queen, the way that power, once handed to someone, tends to multiply in their hands whether or not it was meant to. No woman dared look at Leon twice. No woman in the palace was brave enough to even whisper admiration for him while Kara was within a country mile. Her ladies-in-waiting, Celia and Petra, had modeled themselves on her sharpness and served as her eyes and ears when she could not be everywhere at once. The one exception to the rule of silent submission was Dana. Not because Dana was bold enough to defy Kara openly, quite the opposite, but because Dana's feelings for Leon were so old and so visible to Kara's sharp eyes that they had long since become the primary source of Kara's entertainment. She could not get rid of Beta Soren's daughter, because Soren was untouchable, the Alpha's most trusted man, the one who had shaped Leon into who he was through years of counsel and loyalty. To move against Dana directly was to move against Soren, and not even Kara was willing to do that. So she bullied her instead. She had been doing it for years with the particular persistence of someone who enjoys it. And now the king was looking for a woman he could not find, a ghost in a red costume, and the whole palace was buzzing with it, and Kara spent her evenings in her chambers gripping her wine cup a little too hard and saying nothing. Dana, meanwhile, was in the library. She sat in the deep window chair with her feet tucked beneath her and an ancient scroll open across her knees, and she was not reading it. She was thinking about ocean blue eyes and the particular shade of red they had been turning in a darkened tavern corner, and she was pressing her fingers to her lips to hold back the smile that kept trying to escape. He had been relentless. Everyone said so. The kitchens, the bakery where she helped her mother, the corridors near the council chambers, the gossip moved through the palace like water through old stone, finding every crack, and everywhere it carried the same astonishing thing. The Alpha King, the man who was known above all else for his preternatural calm, was unraveling. Quietly, certainly, with full dignity and tact, but unraveling nonetheless. He wanted to find this woman and he could not, and it was apparently doing extraordinary things to his composure. Dana put down the scroll and let herself feel it for a moment. Fully, properly feel it. The man she had loved since she was 8 years old, the man who had looked past her in every corridor for the better part of a decade, was desperate. He was searching every road and asking every question and coming up empty. And the reason he was coming up empty was sitting in his palace library right now in an old dress with ink on her fingers, smiling to herself like a woman who has discovered a secret she did not know she had. She had done that to him. She, Dana, had done that. That night her father came home to the Beta's chambers with the look he wore when the palace had gotten under his skin, and he sat at the supper table and said, in the slow, processing way of a man sharing something he had not finished making sense of yet, that the king was losing his mind. I have never seen him like this, Soren said, turning his cup in his hands. He is fixed on something and it has got hold of him the way nothing I have ever seen has got hold of him. He is a man possessed. He paused. All over a dancer no one can find. Dana's mother made a thoughtful sound and ladled more soup into his bowl. Dana, sitting across the room with her book, turned a page she had not read. Her heart was going very, very fast. She lay awake that night listening to the palace settle around her, the old stone shifting in the cold, the distant sound of the night guard's rounds. She had made a decision by the time the first hour of deep night had passed, and she knew it was foolish and she knew it was risky and she was going to do it anyway. Because for the first time in a life that had given her very few opportunities to feel this way, she was excited by a risk. She was going back to the tavern. One last time. Not because she needed the stage or the harp music or the way the firelight caught the gold ringlets, but because the king of Elmora was looking for her with that desperate, uncharacteristic fervor, and she wanted to look him in the eyes one more time from behind her silk veil and let him want what he could not name and could not have. Just once. Then she would come home. She went to bed before her parents and lay still until she heard them settle. Then she rose in the dark, dressed quietly, tucked the magic dust pouch into her waistband, and slipped out through the kitchen garden door. The forest road was dark and breathing. An owl moved between the branches overhead. She walked quickly, the red skirt bundled under her cloak until she reached the far edge of the tree line, where she put on her costume properly, applied the dust generously through her hair and across the back of her neck and her wrists, tied the silk veil, and became someone else. She became the dancer. Bren saw her come in through the back entrance and his face went through 6 expressions in approximately 2 seconds. He has been here every night since, he said in an urgent underbreath, taking her arm. Every single night. Sits in the corner, stays until close, leaves without a word. My serving boys are afraid of him. He looked at her with the eyes of a man who is both thrilled and terrified by his own situation. He is in the corner right now. Dana looked toward the stage. The harp was warming up. 2 other dancers were already moving at the far end. She rolled her shoulders back, walked through the curtain, and stepped onto the stage. The room responded the way it always did. The particular hush of collective attention, every eye finding her at once, the energy compressing itself into focus. The harp player saw her and shifted immediately into her music, the deep rolling melody she had chosen years ago, the one that started low and slow and built like weather building. She found him in under 10 seconds. Corner table. Hood. Hands flat on the wood. And the eyes. Ocean blue. Already fixed on her, already starting to change at the edges, the faint red beginning to rim the blue like fire finding the border of something it means to consume. Dana danced for him. Directly, deliberately, every movement aimed at that corner with the precision of someone who has spent years knowing exactly what they are doing. The ancient harp swelled and she moved with it, her waist finding the rhythm, her arms tracing the air, the gold ringlets catching every source of light in the room and scattering it. She watched his jaw set. She watched his hands press harder against the table. She watched the red deepen at the edges of his eyes. And then she noticed he was speaking to one of his men. Low. Fast. A few words. And the man began moving through the crowd, quietly, efficiently, touching shoulders and tilting heads toward the door. And men were rising from their seats with the instinctive compliance of people who understand, without being explicitly told, that an alpha has made a request that is not actually a request. The room emptied. Dana did not notice until the harp player had gone, until the other dancers had slipped through the back curtain, until the fire popped loudly in the suddenly quiet room and she came out of the particular trance that the music put her in and realized she was alone on the stage. Alone. Except for him. He pushed back his hood. He crossed the room and stopped at the stage edge and looked up at her, and there was nothing on his face now that was concealed or controlled. The ocean blue eyes were fully red at the edges, and he was looking at her the way a man looks at the one thing he has been searching for, with a kind of raw, unguarded recognition that she had never once in her life seen directed at her. She went very still. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was low and quiet and absolutely serious. She said nothing, because her voice would give her away. Her voice with its stutter and its particular cadence was the only thing in the world the magic dust could not cover. And if she spoke he would know, and if he knew everything would collapse. So she did what she always did when words failed. She let her body speak instead. She began to dance again. Slowly now, close to the edge of the small stage, the music gone but the rhythm still in her blood. And she watched him step up onto the stage, which she had not expected, and then he was beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and his voice came again, quieter this time, almost wondering. "Tell me your name." She kept moving. She could not stop. Stopping felt like dying. The dance was the only place she was not afraid. And then his head tilted slightly and his teeth found the back of her neck. The bite was brief and total and the most extraordinary thing that had ever happened to her body in 19 years of living. She felt it from the tips of her fingers to the soles of her feet, a surge of something that was not pain and was not pleasure and was not anything she had a word for, something ancient and certain and final, like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting its whole existence to be opened. Everything stopped. She stood completely still. He stood completely still. Then she ran. She was off the stage and through the entrance and into the night before he could form a single word, and she heard him call after her, one wordless sound, rough and instinctive, but she was already in the trees, already running her hands through her hair with the magic dust, already erasing herself from the air. She ran until the trees ended and the cave's darkness swallowed her, and she changed with shaking hands and walked back into the palace with her cloak pulled high around her neck. Back in the tavern, Leon stood alone on the empty stage. He did not follow her this time. He stood there for a long time in the quiet, with one hand raised very slowly to touch the place on his own mouth where his teeth had descended without his permission, and he looked at the door she had run through with the expression of a man who has just done something that has changed everything and is only beginning to understand how much. In the following days, Dana wore a shawl. She wore it every day, high around her neck and shoulders, and no one asked, because no one ever asked Dana much of anything. She went to the bakery with her mother. She sat in the library with her scrolls. She watched the palace gossip move around her like water around a stone. More importantly, she avoided King Leon like a plague, staying clear of his sight. She did not go back to the tavern. She was done. She was finished. She had gone too far, the king had come too close. His teeth on the back of her neck was too enormous and too permanent a thing to be dismissed as an accident of proximity. It had been her fault. She had gone there to tease him, and she had underestimated what the dance could do when you aimed it at someone who was already half lost before you started. She would stay away. She would keep the shawl on. She would bury herself in her books and help her mother with the morning bread and wait for all of this to become something that had simply happened once in the past and could be quietly set aside. Kara, meanwhile, had had enough. She went to the elders of the council. She did it with the precision of a woman who has spent her entire life learning exactly how power moves, who holds it, who responds to what kind of pressure. She appealed to the oldest of them first, the ones who had watched Leon grow from a boy to a king and who worried about succession and stability and the orderly continuation of the kingdom. She spoke about duty. She spoke about the promise between their families, the blood debt paid by her father that had purchased this union in the first place. She spoke, with the most exquisitely calibrated note of wounded dignity, about the spectacle of an alpha king in open, public pursuit of a tavern dancer while his betrothed waited. The elders listened. The wedding date was moved forward. Leon received this news in his study and sat with it for a long time. He was an alpha and a king, which meant he had been trained since birth to accept that duty would sometimes ask him to close doors on things he wanted. He had always accepted that. He had never found it comfortable, but he had never found it impossible. Until now, something in him resisted in a way it had not before, a deep, wordless resistance that he could not argue himself past no matter how clearly he stated the terms of his obligation to himself. But he was also Leon, and Leon did not break promises, and he did not dishonor blood debts, and he did not put his own desires ahead of the welfare of the kingdom he had taken an oath to protect. So he folded the chapter of the Red Dancer with the same steady hands he used for everything difficult, and he carried it quietly, and he went on being king. Dana noticed, somewhere around the third day after the announcement of the moved-up wedding, that she had stopped being able to eat full meals. She noticed this the way she noticed most things about herself, from a slight distance, clinically, the way you notice weather through a window. She told herself it was fine. She told herself it was what she had told him to do when she sent him away in the healer's room. She told herself she had no right to feel it pull the way it did, a low and constant ache in her chest that had nothing to do with the wedding or the ceremony or the way the whole kingdom was preparing to celebrate. She wrapped her shawl a little tighter and went to the library and read. The day Kara found the mark, Dana had not been paying attention. She had been standing at the courtyard wall watching the warrior trainees go through their drills, a thing she found quietly compelling in the same way she found dance compelling, the bodies in formation, the patterns of movement, the language of it. She had a scroll under her arm that she had stopped reading. The morning was cool and the sound of the drills was regular and clean. She did not hear Kara coming. The shove was not forceful. It was the casual kind, the push you give something that is in your way, the physical equivalent of being dismissed. Dana's hands flew out to catch herself against the wall and the shawl slipped from her neck and fell to the courtyard stone. And there it was. The mark on the back of Dana's neck. Still faintly raised, still warm even in the cool morning air, the kind of mark that stays because it was meant to stay. Kara went completely still. Then she grabbed Dana's arm and turned her, and leaned close, and used her wolf senses to breathe in the trace that still clung to the mark despite everything the magic dust had done. The trace that was familiar because it was the scent that Kara had been closest to for years, the scent that belonged to the man she was about to marry. The courtyard had gone very quiet. "What?" Kara said, and her voice was a different kind of dangerous now, not the performed cruelty of the corridors but something rawer and more real beneath it. "Is that?" Dana reached for the shawl. Kara pulled it out of reach. "Where did you get that mark?" Louder now. People were turning. The warrior trainees had broken formation. Celia and Petra stood a few feet back with expressions that had shifted into something genuinely uncertain. "You gave yourself to another man," Kara said, and now she was projecting, performing again but for a larger audience, the courtyard, the warriors, the servants crossing the far end of the square, the beater's daughter, marking herself up with some. "Remove your hand from her." The courtyard dropped into the most absolute silence. Leon was at the far end, walking with two of his senior men on a morning circuit of the palace grounds. He had stopped. He was looking at Kara's grip on Dana's arm with an expression that was quiet and final in the way that storms are final before they arrive. Kara released Dana and stepped back. She curtsied, the controlled instinctive curtsy of someone who has excellent reflexes. Her face was composed. Her jaw was tight. Leon crossed the courtyard. He looked at Dana's face first. Then his gaze moved to the mark on the back of her neck, and something moved through his eyes that was not a small thing. He reached out and took her arm very gently, turning it slightly to look at the graze along her elbow where she had caught herself on the wall. The skin was broken. A thin thread of blood. He turned to his man. "Get the healer." And then to Kara, one look, long and hard, that said nothing and everything. And then he bent slightly and picked Dana up, one arm under her knees and one behind her back, and carried her out of the courtyard. Dana was too stunned to produce a single coherent word. She was aware of the courtyard falling away behind them. She was aware of being held by the person she had loved her whole life in the most literal, physical sense that had ever applied. His chest was solid under her side. He smelled like cedar and winter air and something that resonated, with a precision that made her entire chest ache, with the mark on the back of her neck. The healer's chamber was warm. He sat her on the table himself and stood nearby while the healer cleaned and dressed the graze with cool ancient herb paste, watching with the focused attention he gave things that required it. He did not speak until the dressing was tied and the healer stood back. "Leave us," Leon said. The healer and both assistants left the room so fast the door barely had time to register their exit. The fire crackled. The room went still. Leon looked at her. Dana looked at her bandaged arm. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. "Why did you hide from me?" he said. "I do not know what you mean," Dana said immediately, which was not her finest moment but was the first thing that came out. "Dana. I truly do not know what." "Dana." His voice did not rise. It simply became more itself, stripped of every layer except the bedrock, and the bedrock said, "I know. I know it is you. I have known since the courtyard. I have known since the mark." "Stop." She closed her mouth. He waited. When she still said nothing, he moved to the desk and hit it once, flat-palmed, not violent but emphatic, a man reaching the limit of his patience with controlled precision. The sound cracked through the room. Dana flinched. And then the truth came out of her, not because she had decided to tell it but because the flinch had embarrassed her. "I hid," she said, and her voice was shaking but the stutter was minimal now, less than usual, pushed aside by the size of what was moving through her. "Because the only time in my life you have ever looked at me, truly looked at me, was when I was wearing a mask. When I was someone else. When I was the dancer." She looked up at him. "Your whole life I have been here. Right here. In this palace, under this roof, the daughter of the man you trust above everyone else on this earth. And I have been invisible to you. Not unkindly. Not cruelly. Just invisible. Like a piece of furniture in a room you have stopped seeing." Leon had gone very still. "I have wanted you since I was a child," she said, and she heard her own voice say it and could not believe she was saying it but could not stop. "I have wanted you in the way that girls want things they have no business wanting and cannot help wanting anyway. And you saw me as a little girl. Your beater's daughter. Someone to pat on the head and send on her way. And that," she stopped. Swallowed. "That is fine. That is your right. But then I put on a veil and a costume and suddenly I am the one thing in the kingdom you cannot stop looking for. Do you know what that does to a person? Do you know what that says?" Leon's jaw was tight. "It says that Dana, the real Dana, the one with the stutter and the missing wolf and the books, is not worth looking for. But the dancer is. The woman with the covered face is." Her voice cracked on the last word. She pressed her fingers to her lips for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, "You are a selfish man." She heard herself say it and her eyes went wide and she started talking very fast. "I should not have said that, I am sorry. You are the king and you have been nothing but decent to me. I did not mean." "You think I am selfish." The way he said it stopped her completely. It was not anger. It was something more exposed than anger. The voice of a man who has just heard something said about him that has gone in somewhere deep and is sitting there, looking around, deciding whether to stay. "You think," he said again, more quietly, "that I am selfish." She looked at him. He was looking back at her with those ocean blue eyes, and in them was something she had never once seen there when they were directed at her, something open and unguarded and faintly raw. "I do not think you are a bad man," she said. "I think you are a man who did not look, and there is a difference." He was quiet for a long moment. And then he said, with an abruptness that startled them both, "Marry me." She stared at him. "Marry me," he said again, and there was nothing performative about it, nothing of the ceremonial. It was simply a man saying a thing with the full weight of himself behind it. "Let me show you that I am not what you think I am. Let me look properly. Let me start from where I should have started years ago." Dana kept staring. "You want to marry me," she said slowly, "because you feel guilty, because you liked what you saw at the tavern." "I want to marry you," he said, "because I walked into a tavern and my wolf recognized something my eyes had been too foolish to see, and because you just spoke more truth to my face than anyone has managed in the entirety of my reign, and because that mark on your neck is mine and I put it there for a reason that my body understood before my mind caught up." Something in her chest flickered. "Marry Kara," she said. Her voice was thick but steady. "She was promised to you. Her father saved your father's life. The kingdom is expecting it. She has built her entire existence around it." She was crying now. She could feel the tears on her face, and she did not have the spare attention to be ashamed of them. "I am the beater's daughter with a stutter and no wolf. That is not a queen." "You are my mate," he said. "That is not something either of us know." "Then let me choose you now," he said, and there was something desperate in his voice. She slid off the healer's table. She pressed her hands against her face for a moment. Then she looked at him. "I cannot be with someone who found me only when I was hidden," she said. "I cannot be the dancer's consolation prize." And before he could speak, before he could offer another word or argument, she walked to the door and through it and away down the halls. She did not look back. Neither of them knew, in that moment, that on the other side of the door, with her back pressed against the corridor wall and her breath held and her face wearing the expression of a woman who has heard rather more than she planned to, stood Kara. The wedding morning came like all mornings do in ancient kingdoms, with the sun and the birds and the smell of something baking and the absolute indifference of the world to whatever your heart is doing inside your chest. The palace was alive with it. The banquet hall had been transforming for 3 days, every surface dressed in candles and flowers and the particular grandeur that comes from a kingdom expressing its hope through decoration. The people of Elmora had waited a long time for their king to take his queen, and the mood outside the palace walls was celebratory and warm, and if there were whispers about the mystery dancer and the search that had gone quiet, they were the kind of whispers that get quickly swallowed by louder, more official narratives. Dana sat on her bed in the beater's chambers with her hands folded in her lap. She had told her parents she was unwell. Her mother had pressed a cool cloth to her forehead and her father had looked at her with eyes that saw more than she wanted them to and said nothing because sometimes a parent's love is knowing when not to press. They had gone to the wedding. The chambers were quiet. How could she go? How could she sit in a hall and watch and stand and curtsy and pretend that it was simply a royal occasion she was attending as the beater's daughter, as a piece of furniture in a room that had always stopped seeing her? She sat and looked at the window and listened to the distant sound of the palace filling with people. Then the door opened. Kara stood in the threshold. She was in her wedding gold, all of it, the full regalia that must have taken hours to prepare, and she was magnificent in it in the cold way that very powerful things are magnificent. She looked at Dana for a moment with the composed expression she always wore when she wanted her real expression not to show. Then she stepped inside and closed the door and smiled. "I thought," she said pleasantly, "that you and I might share a drink before the ceremony, to put old things behind us." She moved to the side table where Dana's mother had left a jug of wine and 2 cups, as she always did in the evenings. Poured both. Held one out. "I'm going to be queen today, Dana. I can afford to be generous." Dana looked at the cup. She looked at Kara's face and felt something small and fragile and desperately hopeful rise in her chest, because she was a girl who had always wanted the cruelty to stop, who had always hoped that somewhere underneath the sharp edges there was something that could soften, who had spent years wishing that just once someone would extend a hand in the direction of peace. She took the cup. "They Saturday." Kara spoke lightly, about the ceremony and the flowers and the way the banquet hall had been arranged, and Dana listened and drank with great hope, that perhaps this was real. Perhaps the years ahead would be different. Perhaps becoming queen had indeed changed something, softened something, opened a door that had always been locked. The weakness arrived so quietly she almost did not notice it. A looseness first, in her hands. Then a heaviness behind her eyes, slow and spreading, like ink dropped into water. She set down her cup and looked at her fingers and found they were not responding the way she was asking them to. Kara was watching her. The lightness was gone from her face. Every layer was gone. What was underneath it was something Dana had always known was there and had always hoped was not as large as it seemed. Wolfsbane, Kara said. Her voice was very calm. The calm of someone who has planned a thing thoroughly and is watching it proceed on schedule. The old kind. The kind that hunters used for wolves too old and sick to be useful. I found it in the ancient scrolls, funnily enough. A pause. Your ancient scrolls, as it happens. Dana tried to stand but could not. Here is what happens next, Kara continued, rising and smoothing her gold skirt with one hand. Tomorrow morning they will find you. And everyone will know why you chose to drink poison, because I am going to tell them. The beater's daughter, who tried to seduce the king as a tavern dancer and was rejected. She could not bear to watch him marry another woman. Who could not get her wolf and could not get her king and could not get anything in the end except what she deserved. Her voice did not shake. It never shook. Your parents will grieve, of course. But the palace will understand. It is a sad story, but it makes sense. And it is much neater than the alternative. She crossed the room. She stopped beside Dana and looked down at her, and for one moment something moved across her face that was not cruelty, something that might have been the ghost of something she had burned out of herself long ago. Then she kicked her once, hard, in the stomach, and walked out the door. Dana lay on the floor of the beater's chambers and listened to the door click shut and the silence settle and the distant sounds of the palace preparing to celebrate. The wolfsbane moved through her like a tide and she let herself feel it for exactly one breath, the terror of it. Then she stopped feeling it and started looking. Her eyes moved across the chamber. The shelf. The small wooden shelf beside her bed where she kept her experiments, the vials and small stoppered bottles of her private years of study, most of them unfinished, most of them uncertain. One of them, small and sealed with wax and full of pale gold liquid. She had not been confident enough in it to test it. It was imprecise, untested, built on readings and prediction and the kind of hope that only someone who loves old medicine the way Dana loved it would be willing to stake a life on. She did not have another option. She reached for the shelf. Her arms were not cooperating. She dragged herself across the floor of her own room with the taste of fear in her mouth and the wolfsbane pushing down on her like a hand pressing on the top of her head, and her fingers found the vial and knocked it and it fell and shattered on the stone floor. The pale gold liquid spread across the dark stone. She lowered herself to it and licked it from the floor with her tongue, and the taste of it was bitter and sweet at once, and she stayed very still and waited. For a moment there was nothing. Then it arrived. It was not gentle. It was not warm or gradual. It came through her like lightning finding the earth, one enormous surge of power that started in her blood and moved outward in all directions at once, and it hit the wolfsbane and it hit the weakness and it hit every place inside her. She pushed herself off the floor and grabbed the door frame and pulled herself to standing. Her dress was torn where she had fallen. Her hair had come undone. She was not steady. She was not composed. She was barely upright. But she walked. Down the corridor and through the connecting hall and through the arched entrance to the banquet hall, where the warmth and the candlelight and the gathered press of an entire kingdom hit her like a wave, and she walked through it with her chin up and her hair loose and her torn dress and her undone everything. And she saw the moon elder at the front with his hands already raised and Leon standing at the altar facing him, and Kara taking her first step toward them from the other end of the hall. Stop. The word came out of her larger than she expected. It had the quality of a voice that has not been used at full capacity in years and is discovering, for the first time, what full capacity actually is. It rang against the ceiling and landed in the gathered silence of 400 people who had all turned at once to look at her. She walked forward. She felt her mother rise from her seat and heard her name said in her mother's voice and felt a hand reach for her arm, and she gently but firmly kept walking. She poisoned me, Dana said. Her voice held. It was the steadiest her voice had ever been. Kara put wolfsbane in my drink and left me to die in the beater's chambers. The hall detonated. Voices from every direction. An elder calling for order. Her father on his feet, his face a thing she had never seen before. And Kara, who had stopped walking and was standing in the center of the hall in her gold regalia, had assembled her poise back over her face like armor being buckled on. "She is the dancer," Kara said, and her voice cut through the noise with the precision of something well sharpened. "The one the king has been searching for. The beater's daughter who has been performing at a common tavern for men's entertainment. She is humiliated. She is making accusations because—" "I am making accusations," Dana said, "because they are true." One of the older elders, a man named Aldrich who had served on the council since before Leon was born, rose from his seat with the deliberate gravity of his years and pointed at Dana. "Guards," he said, "remove her from—" Leon stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He simply stepped forward and the guards stopped, and the growl that came from him was low and instinctive, and it sent every wolf in the room taking an involuntary half-step back. Then he turned to Dana. His eyes were very careful on her face, reading it, reading everything. "Are you certain?" he asked, quietly enough that only she could hear. "I am certain," she said. He straightened. He looked at Kara and she couldn't take it that even in the midst of chaos, Leon still chose Dana. So Kara, who had held together through worse, who had faced down challenging moments with the composure of a woman built for power, did something that surprised even her. She cracked. Not from guilt. Not from remorse. From something older and rawer than either, the frustration of years, the tight-clenched fury of someone who has watched what they believe to be theirs being looked at by the wrong person. "Yes." The word came out before she could stop it. "Yes, I put the wolfsbane in her cup and I am glad I did. I have hated you for years," she said, directly to Dana, ignoring the hall, ignoring Leon, ignoring all of it in the way that people ignore everything when they have finally started speaking and cannot stop. "I have hated you since I understood what you felt for him. I could not remove you because of your father, and so I did what I could and I waited. And when I found out that he was losing his mind over tavern dancer and that dancer was you, this pathetic, stuttering, wolfless, useless shadow of a girl." The air in the room changed. It started in Dana's chest. Not thought, not decision, but something older than both, the thing that had been building under layers of years like pressure under stone, the rage of a girl who had been told she was nothing so many times that it had become a religion she believed, the unremarkable fact of her existence. And then Kara's hand came up and reached for her, and something in Dana said no. Not a spoken word. Not a thought. A roar. It came out of her from somewhere she had never known before, a sound that was not entirely human, that shook the candles in their brackets and sent a shiver through the stone walls of the ancient hall. And Dana dropped to her knees not from weakness but from what was happening to her body, the transformation coming not gradually as it came for most wolves but all at once, complete and enormous and inevitable, like a dam giving way. She shifted. The wolf she became was unlike anything the hall had ever held. Silver white, bright even in the candlelight, large in the way that felt impossible and was undeniable. She stood in the banquet hall of Velmora's palace, and she was enormous, and she was real, and she was looking out at the gathered kingdom from behind eyes that were the color of moonstones. The silence was absolute. The Moon Elder said it. He said it like a man speaking in a dream, uncertain whether his own voice was real. Zeta Wolf. The word moved through the hall like a tide. Zeta. The rarest designation the moon goddess bestowed upon the wolves of the old world. The most powerful wolf in any pack, the wolf that appeared once in a generation or not at all. Velmora had not had one in 5 generations. Most people in the hall had lived their entire lives believing it a thing of old stories. And it was standing in the banquet hall in a torn dress that had not survived the shift. Leon had moved to the front of the crowd before anyone had fully processed what they were seeing. He had shifted too, the great dark alpha wolf that every warrior in the kingdom measured themselves against, placing himself between the silver-white wolf and the assembled crowd with the instinct of an alpha protecting his pack from an unknown. And then their eyes met. The mated bond hit them both like a struck bell, one enormous resonant recognition that moved through every wolf sense at once, past every thought and every layer of decision, past the years of invisibility and the mark on her neck and the search through the forest roads and the empty tavern stage, down to the place where the true things live and recognize each other without introduction. He knew. She felt it land in her, not understanding it the way a person understands things, but the way a body understands things, completely and without translation. The wolf inside her recognized the dark alpha wolf the way you recognize something you have always known but never had a word for. And it overwhelmed her. She had never shifted before. She did not know what a mated bond was. She did not know what any of this meant, and the hall was full and loud and everyone was staring, and something enormous had just happened inside her that she had no framework to hold. She ran. She ran the way she always ran, through the open banquet hall doors and into the corridor and out through the palace into the night and into the forest, where the trees received her without judgment and the dark was familiar and the only sound was her own breathing and the soft rhythm of her own paws on old earth. Behind her in the hall, she heard an elder's voice ring out over the noise. "Seize Kara. Now." Kara pleaded as the warriors closed around her. I only meant to, please, I did not mean to, her voice getting smaller and less certain with every word. Dana ran until the trees were dark and deep around her, and then she shifted back without knowing how she did it, and she was sitting on cold earth in the dark forest of Velmora with her knees pulled to her chest, crying in the particular way that people cry when something very large has just happened that they do not yet have the shape of. She heard him before she saw him. His footsteps in the dark, unhurried, his breathing, the cedar and winter scent of him that she had carried on her neck for weeks. He sat beside her without asking. He was a man again, not a wolf, and he sat on the cold forest floor and did not say anything for a while, and the forest breathed around them. Everything she said was a lie, he said eventually. I know, Dana said, and was surprised to find that she did. You are not nothing. You have never been nothing. He said it with the particular quality of someone correcting a record that should never have stood. Anyone who told you otherwise in your life was wrong in a way that reflects entirely on them and not at all on you. She looked at him. His face in the dark was open in a way she had never seen it, the king set aside, just the man, sitting on cold earth in a forest with his fated mate, trying to say the right thing. I am afraid, she admitted. Everyone knows. About my dancing. About the tavern. I have shamed my family. My father, his position. Your father's position is entirely secure, Leon paused. And you have shamed no one. You danced. You loved something and you were extraordinary at it and you protected it because the world had not given you reason to trust it with the things you loved. He was quiet for a moment. I had a part in that. I know I did. Dana wiped her face with the back of her hand. I still cannot just run off into the sunset with you, she said. I told you. I need to know you. The real you. Not the king in the corridor telling me to defend myself. Not the man under the hood in the tavern corner. You. Then that is what we will do, he said. Simply. Without negotiation. He picked her up, the way he had in the courtyard, and carried her back through the trees toward the lights of the palace. The days that followed had the quality of something settling, like land after rain. Kara was brought before the council. The wolfsbane was found. Her ladies were questioned, the servants were questioned, and the truth came forward. She was stripped of her title, removed from the palace, and returned to her father's estate in the far district. The council sat with the discomfort of what they had allowed, and to their credit, sat with it honestly. Beta Soren came to Dana the evening after it was all done. He sat beside her and was quiet for a while, the way he was quiet, thinking with his whole body. Then he put his arm around her and held her, and that was all, and it was everything. Her mother put a loaf on the table and sat down across from Dana and said, simply, I am so proud of you. And Dana put her face in her hands and cried in a different way than she had been crying, a releasing kind of crying, the crying of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has been finally, gently, allowed to put it down. The kingdom celebrated. 3 days of it, which was how Velmora celebrated things that mattered. The moon goddess had sent them a zeta wolf. The moon goddess had given their king his fated mate. The moon goddess had been paying attention all along and had known exactly what she was doing. Leon announced Dana formally. Not in a ceremony, not with the pomp of the throne room, but in the council chamber, in front of the elders, in the quiet voice that carried more weight than shouting. He said that Dana, daughter of Beta Soren, was his fated mate and his chosen queen, and that the welfare of her person was now and would always be a matter that he considered identical to the welfare of the kingdom itself. The elders nodded. Even old Aldrich, who had called for the guards to remove her from the hall, nodded with the dignity of a man making a correction. Dana had gotten her wolf. The first zeta in 5 generations. She could feel it now, a permanent warmth at her center, something present and alive that had not been there before, something that knew its own power in the way that rivers know their course. She had not shifted again since that night and did not need to. She knew it was there. It would be there when it was needed. She was ready, she told Leon, when he came to ask. She would like to know him. She would like to do that the right way, not through ceremony or council or the formal arrangements of kingdoms, but as people do it, over time and conversation, slowly and honestly. Then have dinner with me, he said. The dress arrived at her door the morning of the dinner, which meant he had been certain she would say yes. It was deep blue, the color of winter, and the gold at its edges echoed, with a deliberateness she recognized immediately, the gold ringlets of her dancer's costume. As though someone had said, with cloth and thread, that both of her were being invited to this dinner. All of her. The girl with the books and the girl with the veil and the wolf and the stutter and the love that had been filling pages since she was 8 years old. She sat before the mirror and let the royal maids arrange her hair and looked at herself and did not look away, which was new, and felt the pleasure of the new thing carefully. She walked to the banquet hall alone. He had arranged it so that only one table remained in the vast space, set for 2, with candles the whole length of it and flowers that smelled like the forest after rain. When she appeared in the doorway, Leon was already standing. He looked at her the way the hall had looked at the silver-white wolf, with the immediate, total arrest of all other awareness. He crossed the room toward her and stopped, and for a moment he simply looked, and she let him look, and she looked back, and between them something easy and true moved through the air. My eyes, he said, with the gravity of a man making a formal statement, have had no use all my life up until this moment. She laughed. A real laugh, not performed, not careful, the laugh of someone who is genuinely and suddenly delighted, and he softened at the sound of her laughter. He gestured toward the table with a slight inclination of his head, and moved to pull her chair out for her, and she crossed the room and sat, and he moved to his own seat across the candlelit table and settled into it and looked at her without taking his eyes away. My name is Leon, he said, as though they were meeting for the first time. As though he were reintroducing himself to the person he should have introduced himself to years ago. King of Velmora. A pause. The corner of his mouth curved, slow and certain and just slightly devastating. And lucky enough for me, I am your mate. His eyes held hers across the candlelight. And I want you to dance for me again, he said, with the smirk of a man who knows exactly what he is saying and is entirely unrepentant about it. Dana looked at him. And the smile that came to her face in that moment was not a small thing. It lit her from the inside, that smile, filling her eyes and her cheeks and the corners of her mouth and the whole wide space of her face, and it was the most beautiful thing the banquet hall of Velmora had ever held within its walls. And they sat there in the candlelight, the king and the beater's daughter, the dancer and the zeta wolf, the man who had taken too long to look and the girl who had always known exactly who she was, and between them the future of a kingdom settled quietly into the best shape it had ever taken. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, now is the time, because there are more stories from the ancient kingdoms coming, and you do not want to miss a single one. Hit that subscribe button. Give this video the like it deserves.